All right, so we're going to get into some feature items here today, no pun intended, but we're really going to talk about kind of the future of NFTs, what this might mean for licensing, interactivity, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a good interview, I think. You guys are going to like this one with a founder from Feature. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPass. So joining me today is Stephen Alous, who is the Feature founder and CEO. We'll talk about Feature, so welcome into the show.
Hi, Paul. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, so Stephen, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Feature itself. If you go to the website, it's feature.io. For many of you, maybe you haven't heard about this project. Kind of give us a rundown of what you guys are up to.
So Feature is a new entertainment platform that's really producing the future of interactive content, leveraging blockchain technology.
When you look at, okay, so I'm looking at your website here, and there was a couple of things here. The project list, obviously we're going to focus on Lollipop here in a second, but I was also looking at Huxley. This was film, comics, gaming, Gossamer, collectibles, also Fortnite, obviously with the NFT component tied to Braun Studios, and then Love, Death, and Art, which we'll talk a little bit about, Love, Death, and Robots, a little bit over there on Netflix, and then the licensing aspect. So lots happening over there, and let's not forget Degen Trilogy. So, and that was the Coinbase project. We've actually reported on that before. Let's get into a little bit about kind of the partnership, because obviously you guys have partnered up with David Ayer, really tying into this with this NFT series on Lollipop. Let's go into Lollipop itself, and we'll talk about David Ayer here in a second to kind of give you guys, for you guys viewing or listening in on the podcast, a little bit of credence. You probably already recognize the name. Talk about Lollipop specifically, though, of what you're trying to do with that project.
So we really see an opportunity as there's a lot of convergence in technology right now between real-time game engines, gaming, narrative storytelling, and what we consider radically changing sense of ownership in terms of digital collectibles. Right. So Lollipop is the convergence of all of this, and what we have dubbed next generation storytelling. It is a 10-episode, 10-race series with one story that covers the entirety, that allows for the audience to actually participate and come together as a community and own collectibles that have a role within the actual races, and that those assets also have a role within the narrative episodic. So for the first time ever, there's a connection between those digital components and the content in a way that actually has real world stakes. So we're really excited to be pioneering in that, the next frontier of storytelling.
You kind of tested that with Netflix a little bit with Love, Death, and Robots with the NFT interactivity. So is that kind of the track that you're planning to go down, or is there going to be something even more interesting with Lollipop?
Yeah, so each of our deployments are really a way to test the technology, similar to how in the early days of Pixar, they would develop intellectual property or commercials that would showcase the power of their rendering engine, which was called RenderMan. So for us with, Netflix, it was a real use case in trying to show what you could do with blockchain enabled content. How do we create that direct connection to the audience at a moment when they're emotionally hooked? So when they were watching Love, Death, and Robots, they had an opportunity to connect with that project at that time. So Lollipop is the 2.0 version of that now, because these assets are digital, they're actually collectibles that the audience can own. They have a role within the real-time race or the actual narrative. And so there's an even stronger bind between the audience and the content.
Yeah. I think the key here is that interactivity that is being developed within the IP these days, especially when you look at blockchain and how NFTs are going to be utilized. That, to me, for creators like what you guys have done with David, to me, I think is going to be the holy grail, because it's something we have not necessarily seen evolve. So kudos to you guys. If you guys are not aware of David Ayer, this is a good example of his CV. I'm just going to kind of run down here on some of his credits, but I mean, you can kind of see, look at this on the list here, tax collector, a lot of these, Bright, Suicide Squad, of course, for his, and even Fury. So, I mean, this is really great because this shows really an A-lister, from Hollywood that's involved in some of the best IP out there, taking a step in a new frontier. Do you think we'll see more, directors and producers start to look at this as a potential to really kind of amp up IP in the future?
100%. I think creators are looking for new and innovative ways to tell stories. And what we've seen from the streaming side of the world is it's still pretty one-dimensional. It's linear content. And if you look at the way that consumer behavior has changed, a lot of people watch content and they're on their phone, they're texting, or they're trying to communicate. I think what we've lost is the water cooler conversation that we used to have around content, that sense of community. And, cinema hasn't really picked up back to where it was pre-pandemic. But we just see consumer behavior changing, and we feel like there's ways through cross-platform and in bringing back a cohesiveness from the fragmentation that we were experiencing in content.
Yeah. Yeah, in looking at kind of the integration and how you're going to be executing on this, I'm looking at the website for Lollipop Racing. So you can go in and secure your key, which is literally a lollipop. I was looking at your tweet right here. So start your engines. And these are going to be sent out. I guess this is the phygital side of it, physical, digital. Explain how this is related to the interactive that is going to take place with Lollipop. Kind of walk me through the fan experience.
So the idea behind the phygital lollipop was really to connect a consumable, which is actually the world's first edible allow list. We went through a lot of R&D to come up with something that was an actual lollipop that would tie into the blockchain. So it was a really novel way of taking a consumable, but allowing you to have an immutable digital copy through the experience. So the audience will open those lollipops. There's a QR code that's actually tied to the email address that they logged in with or acquired the lollipop, and then it issues them a digital version of the lollipop. Now, down the road, those lollipops will actually convert. The digital ones will convert into other collectibles within the ecosystem. But this was a nice kind of real world correlated price point to get the audience into the experience early on and have some fun and deploy something novel.
There's not actually anything in the lollipop, though, is there? It's just the device that kind of it connects them to the digital version.
Correct. It's just a novel use of a QR code that's actually in the lollipop. Yeah.
Yeah. We had seen a project with a retail brand, and they were using a similar model, but they put the QR code at the bottom of a cup. So you had to actually drink the drink where you revealed the QR code, which then, of course, engaged them in. So interesting. I like the integration of physical assets or items that start to kind of connect to the digital component, because I think that starts to bridge that, that barrier that a lot of retail consumers don't necessarily get it until they kind of marry the two together. And then I think, it's a great branding and marketing idea for sure. All right, so from there, I've executed on the QR code. Now I've got my digital lollipop. How am I going to utilize that inside the experience?
So those that's essentially an allow list. Those lollipops, however many you've acquired, will translate to the digital collectibles within the ecosystem. Over the next 6 months, there will be several releases that continue to advance the Lollipop project. We'll be having a trailer. We're going to have a bunch of stuff that really starts to fill out as we head into Q2 of next year.
Interesting. All right. So I want to jump back over to Netflix. You mentioned this a little bit. This was obviously Love, Death, and Robots right here. But as you scan down, I was even surprised at some of the numbers here on this. So 92 million site views, artworks minted 138,000, unique holders 32,000, and 682,000 users. And if you're over on OpenSea, just to give people an idea, if you haven't seen some of these, I'll play one real quick. You can kind of see some of the NFT assets themselves right there from Love, Death, and Robots. What was your anticipation on this? Did you think it would be as big as this, bigger, or was this overperforming about what you expected? Kind of your thoughts on that.
This smashed our expectations. You know, first of all, it was a treasure. It was an Easter egg hunt, so it wasn't expected to actually perform that well because people really had to be looking out for the QR codes. Now, it was worth noting that the QR codes were actually the first broadcast QR codes within Netflix content. So they actually aired on the premiere of the series. And then there was also an activation in IRL. So we had a billboard in Times Square and a billboard in Los Angeles that allowed for people to mint or what we called right click and save these digital collectibles. So they had a choice. They could either get the free one or they could mint. And what we saw was the majority of people actually wanted to mint. But it definitely exceeded our expectations. You know, I think around now it's about 100 million eyeballs that have touched upon this project. And then, you know, if you look at Netflix's subscription base, it's about half of Netflix's subscription.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. That's pretty impressive. And I think those kind of numbers obviously will entice, you know, some of the best creators out there to kind of start to step in this direction. I look at this and, you know, because we've had film people on here before. We've talked about kind of the engagement between creators of the next generation. Obviously, music is one of the big ones, but I think film is going to be another area that will really start to find new ways to kind of engage with the fans. The other aspect of this is how brands might start integrating. You know, in the past, it's always been kind of that brand placement, product placement within films, things of that nature. What are your thoughts on brands that start to kind of move into this direction with creators, especially with what you guys have been able to do? Do you think that's going to create some new potential partnerships or ideas, especially around creativity?
We believe there's a lot of opportunity for new revenue streams and obviously a new way to directly engage with the audience. I think one big part is that audiences want a sense of authenticity. And when brands really take content or novel marketing activations and it becomes more of an experience, and it moves away from an advertisement to really just a form of content or supporting a creator and lifting those voices up on a global scale, it really starts to resonate. And so that's how we look at the relationship between the consumer and the blockchain, is really that connective tissue that we can bring in brands earlier into the experience and create something novel together.
All right, so David, I think this is going to be a huge opportunity for creators. So, you know, what you guys are doing, first of all, congrats. Kudos to you guys for
Thank you.
Just kind of pioneering this space. But I think we're going to see some pretty interesting elements start to create around this. Let's get into the licensing, because this is starting to kind of bridge that gap. And it does do some things. I wanted to jump over to just the feature IP beta site that you guys have, and you know, the statement pretty much says it right there: keep the art, sell the rights. Explain to me, first of all, how you guys got to this point. What is your goal with it, and how could, you know, great NFT holders really utilize this service?
Yeah, so this was deployed about 9 months ago, and we really saw an opportunity as, you know, if you're building a media ecosystem, licensing in regards to intellectual property is a huge component of that. How do you monetize your intellectual property? And what we found was that the traditional licensing system was very antiquated. It was basically a contract that said, if you do this, I'll give you that. And if we don't, I'll give you X amount of money, and we'll, you know, if there's a dispute, we'll dispute it in this territory. And I thought that was really like low level programming that we could bring to the blockchain. So we built this platform and went after the low hanging fruit, which was there are NFT assets that are out there that had rights associated, but really there was no framework for people to monetize that work. The rights. And so we created a platform that connected buyers and sellers. And our first client licensed our technology was Coinbase. and it was around this project called the Degen Trilogy, which they wanted to cast Bored Apes into this multi-million-dollar production.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. When you look at that opportunity, especially with Coinbase, obviously this opens up the pipeline for a lot of other use cases for IP like this. And you look at the number of creators, and I was just looking here on your website, the number of creators that are coming soon. I mean, you've got a pretty good lineup here of, Meebit's in here, obviously Kongs, etc. Do you find this, are you selecting them or are the creators coming to you? How does the process work for you to get them into this program?
Well, there are a few requirements. Number one, they have to have rights that are associated in the actual NFT or via their terms of service that grants the holders commercial rights to use them. Some are full IP. You basically own the entirety of it. And that's the first requirement. Then we also look at, the demand that's kind of out there for the users that want to exploit those rights. And then on the other end, what's the popularity? We think that this is just the tip of the iceberg for licensing on chain. If we really think about interoperability and the rails that need to be built to have assets move around from different experiences in the metaverse, it's paramount that the licensing, what we call internally, it's really on-chain digital rights management.
Yeah, well, which I think is going to be pretty interesting, especially as we start to see tokenization of the world, coming. Likelihood of this use case, we're going to get outside of what we know as kind of the NFT art scenario and moving into everything from game assets, other brand assets. If you look at Nike and Artifact, some very interesting aspects there that could be, you see what they've done with LeBron and many more potentials coming down the pipe that could really start to bridge the gap here. And it's a very interesting use of the licensing side of it, which is, if you think sports alone, they're kind of one of the masters of licensing. So I could see this going in a lot of right ways for you guys. So you guys are doing so much. Interesting stuff. I was following your Twitter account, and I saw that and then I also see you have a Steve Jobs pixel art back behind you. So I'm assuming this tweet right here. So I read into the set a little bit here, but this tweet right here, feeling really inspired after Apple's Vision Pro launch. We covered this yesterday. I was intrigued by what was happening with Apple, but I don't want to read this, but I want to get your opinion. When you saw Vision Pro get released, a lot of people in the future of how content, creators, IP, and digital ownership, I feel like might have just got reset yesterday in a big way. What is your thought on how that will roll out?
I think it all comes back again to the convergence of these technologies. We were very fragmented in what we would consider kind of pre-rendered linear cinema. We had the evolution of gaming, which is real-time game engines, and to allow that interactivity. And now we're finding a way to combine both. And because we're adding the third dimension of augmented reality or virtual reality, it's really allowing us to become a part of the story. And I think that through digital collectibles, that's where you add the extra layer of dimension, where at Feature, we're exploring things like, if I own that digital collectible, can that be the lead character in my show? Right? Or things like, can I interact with the can I interact with the characters from the series leveraging AI and ML, and the community has to come together to unlock the next episode. So it's kind of a nice way to combine linear storytelling. So a single creator can tell a story that we all go on a journey on, but how do we include the community and step into the world a little bit more, so to speak?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that, and even our team, our research team here, when we were analyzing what Apple did, one of the things that was brought up, and I think your particular situation may actually, I don't know that it would be a solving it, but it would open up a new way of interactivity. And what I mean by that is, in many of the visual cases of how the headset was being utilized, in often scenarios, it was an individual by themselves. So that back to your point of, whether it's watch parties, which has already started to take place, when people are in different places, but I could see this now integrating into social, back to your interactivity inside the creation, whether it's film, shorts, etc. That could really open up some intriguing engagement for people across the world. Your friend that you went to college with that's living in, London versus, here in LA or Miami. So I'm excited about it. I think when you look at what they kind of showed yesterday, and again, this is probably just going to be the tip of the iceberg. What excited you most?
Wow. Well, first of all, the technological achievements there. My background is in computer graphics and machine vision. So a lot of the physical capture components, I was very early in that business. I was working on the Matrix 2 and 3 and Polar Express. We dealt a lot with facial capture and really how do you capture the eyeballs and translate human emotion into digital characters. So I know the achievement of what they did there, and I think that's just the beginning for where we start to input ourselves into digital experiences. So I think what also really excited me was it is a platform and a framework that now we can start to tell these types of stories. Mm-hmm. It's a very difficult kind of fragmented ecosystem before, and I think that them planting the flag here, providing the technology to actually showcase these types of stories ultimately opens a new dimension for emotional connectivity to, even though it's an alone experience, I think people are going to start to have that sense of magic again with entertainment.
Interesting. Well, I mean, what I saw, especially when Bob Iger stepped on stage, and we covered this, so if you guys are listening into this, go back and watch that video of our breakdown on the Apple Vision Pro. But when Iger stepped onto stage, he kind of, and I know a lot of it was CGI, but he was representing ideas coming from Disney. And the sports element, the engagement inside a movie, I mean, he uses Mandalorian as a good example, how you kind of are transported into a whole new world. That to me is probably the most intriguing aspect of how content richness could really explode off of the 2D screen that we've been engaged with for the last 50 years. So to me, this is a new era in intellectual property, especially from a retail side in terms of consumption. So I'm very excited about all of this going forward. So Stephen, it's been great having you on the show today. We appreciate you stopping in. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Paul, for having me.
You bet. All right. So you guys, obviously we cover a lot of these extension projects like Feature and many others that are starting to bridge the gap, whether it's in digital collectibles, NFTs, all that good stuff. So make sure and subscribe to the channel. We also do a lot of token breakdowns and typical crypto news, analytics, research, deep dives on that, all the way from things like what is happening with the SEC and Coinbase and Binance. So we don't forget those things. All that happens right here on the network. You can catch all that good stuff. The best way to stay in touch with us, though, is through the Diamond Circle. So click the link down below. You can join. It's free, and it gets you additional content, additional stuff. We do our Web3 podcast over there with Kyle and myself. So make sure and join. It's very easy and very simple. And, of course, if you want to reach me, it is out there on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.